You've had some week. Upon receiving the Congressional Gold Medal on Wednesday, you said, "This is one of the most moving days of my life." Why was it so?
Because I was meeting all these people who had been so supportive for so many years and had never had a chance to thank them before personally, all together.
In your remarks, you said in Washington, Burma has certainly started out on the process of democratization, but how far will it go? How sustainable is it? How genuine is it? How do you at this moment answer those questions yourself?
Well, that's very much up to us. We've got to be determined to take it through. And when I say we, I mean, first of all, the people of Burma, and of course, the institutions of democracy, that is to say, the executive, the legislature, and the more or less as yet non-existent judiciary.
So it's a birth.
It's a birth.
A beginning. And you don't know how the baby will turn out.
I think we know how we want it to turn out, and that's the first thing. We want it to turn out to be healthy and independent, and we're working towards it. As you know, I'm a member of the legislature, so I can speak more for the legislature than for any of the other branches. And I have been pleasantly surprised by how it is developing.
How important was your meeting with President Obama this week?
I do not know how much importance to put on it, but certainly it was a privilege, and it was also very enjoyable. I like your president.
Why is that?
He's nice.
He's a nice man.
Yes.
Can you describe what brought you to that conclusion? What happened in that meeting to make you feel that?
Well, I don't want to discuss what we discussed, but first of all, he's got a very nice smile. I'm sure you know that for yourself. And then he introduced me to his dog, Bo.
Oh, well,
Yes.
That's always helpful in breaking
Yes.
the ice.
Well, no, he introduced me to the dog at the end of the meeting.
Did you ask him to lift economic sanctions on Burma?
I didn't talk about that with him. I'd already discussed this with the members of Congress the previous day, and I had said then that it was time for sanctions to be, I can't say lifted yet, because with regard to the Jade Act, it can't be lifted, but there can be a presidential waiver. And so I spoke in favor of relaxing the sanctions, and when the time comes, of course, it can be lifted as well, legally.
As the progress of democratization improves?
There's that, and also it's a matter of technicalities.
I see. But you would like to see these economic sanctions lifted?
Yes, because I think that we must now learn to stand on our own feet and not depend on the sanctions to push us towards democracy.
You have called democracy, though flawed, a beacon of hope. You have become now a beacon of hope to so many.
Flawed swell.
Oh. But what is the most important message that you have to all the people around the world who are struggling, as you have, for freedom, for democracy?
It's the same struggle for everybody everywhere, because unless we are free, we cannot really realize our own potential. And if we can't realize our own potential, we are like a crippled tree. It would be a stunted growth. And because of that, we all want to be free to be able to realize one's own potential, but obviously without hurting the chances of other people to realize theirs.
One of the things that people admire about you is that you did not give up. People around the world face such challenges, they may think to give up. So I ask you, what sustained you?
Well, I just didn't know how to give up. I never thought of needing anything to sustain me. It never occurred to me that I should give up.
Why?
Perhaps it's the way I was brought up, or perhaps it's the way I am. But I was brought up by my mother very strictly, and she always spoke about the importance of a sense of duty. And if you take up something, you just don't drop it. You stay with it, with the responsibility that you've assumed. You stay with it. You don't drop it because it becomes too hard.
But there were moments, I'm certain, when you felt all hope might be lost.
No, never.
Never?
No. I was not always thinking of hope. I was always thinking of what to do next. And I think that's a great help. Instead of thinking about the long term, which you have to, of course you have to have a set goal, but it's important that you think of what you need to do from day to day.
So you're constantly pushing. What is the next thing? What is the next thing? But when you're under house arrest for 15 years, to shut you up, to keep you silent, it is not as if there's a lot you can do.
Well, it's not a bad thing not to have to say anything for a long time. It gave me a chance to listen to others. I learned to listen very well because I listened to the radio about 5-6 hours a day. And this ability to listen has stood me in very good stead.
And I'm curious about that, because I think it's something most people, especially someone who cares to fight for something that matters, I wonder if you could illuminate a little bit about that. How has listening helped you in your fight?
It helps you to understand how people's minds work, what other people think, what their point of view is. And it also teaches you a lot about people. By listening to the radio, I learned more about people I'd known before house arrest than when I had been meeting them face to face. If you listen to the same person, been interviewed a number of times, you begin to know him or her better than you might if you just met him or her socially outside.
Do you think that this allowed you to create a better relationship with Burma's leaders so that it would allow you to reach this point where you are today?
I've always thought that the basis on which I have been able to improve my relationship with Burma's generals is simply that I'm inclined to like them, as I often explain and as people find rather peculiar.
And why?
Because I like the army. This is how I was brought up. My father was the founder of the Burmese army, and I was brought up to look upon the soldiers as my father's children, as my father's sons.
So in liking their humanity, what they've chosen in their lives to do, you're saying that this is what created the connection that allowed you to be where you are today, a member of parliament?
I think you can never get rid of of the influences of your childhood. And basically, a liking for the army had been rooted in me very, very early on. This is what I mean.
So it allowed you to communicate?
I hope so.
And connect.
Yes.
When you were shut away over these 15 years to be silenced, did you worry you would never be heard from again?
No, I never thought in such terms. As I said to you, I had a goal, which was democracy for Burma, a peaceful, prosperous, free Burma. But I thought more in terms of what I had to do next than about when I was going to be free. Of course, I thought about that from time to time, but this was not in my hands, so I didn't spend too much time on that. I spent time on doing what I was able to do.
It sounds like there's a degree of stubbornness involved.
Well, people keep saying I'm stubborn. Perhaps I am.
What words would you use?
Consistent?
Senator John McCain was moved to tears himself. He himself was a POW. He was moved to tears in talking about you in Washington. And he talked about your courage. I wonder if you could answer, where does your courage come from?
It's very humbling when somebody like John McCain talks about my courage. I've read his memoirs, and I think he went through a lot more hardship than I ever did, because although I was kept under house arrest, I was kept well. And I must make a point of saying that the military regime treated me well while I was under house arrest. Apart from putting me under house arrest, they didn't ill-treat me. I was much better off than my colleagues who were put into prison. So I have never thought of myself as being particularly courageous. There was not that much for me to take.
But I don't know. I think most people would disagree.
Well, I think I had an advantage there in the sense that I am able to live on my own. Isolation doesn't worry me too much. I think it worries some people. I have known people who could not take isolation. But I had books, don't forget. I had the radio. And so I had my links to the outside world. I always had something to think about, something to interest me. And so there was no need for despair or loneliness.
I feel a need in hearing you say this in honor of your family, your husband and your children, to ask a question about how it was for you, though. And I mean this with respect to you, but when you say you didn't suffer, you could face the isolation, you had a purpose, very disciplined. To honor the love of your family, I feel a need to ask how you survived emotionally, not being with them.
Well, you do survive. I've always said that, this is why I always said that when people talk about my sacrifices, I feel embarrassed. I don't think I've made any sacrifices. If any sacrifices were made, they were made by my family. I just took the path that I chose. And it was a choice I made, not a sacrifice.
Because it was for something that mattered.
To me, yes. And in a sense, you could say that that was selfish because I made a choice in favor of what I believed in. And for that, my family had to make their own sacrifices in agreeing to my decision.
Do you know why this belief was so important to you, to give up so much? Was it love? Hope? A vision?
I think it had a lot to do with my parents. My mother always brought me up to understand that my father loved his country. And of course, I always knew that he didn't live to see his dream come true. He died just before we regained independence. And I suppose always I wanted to realize his dream for him.
And you have?
Not yet.
You will?
I hope so.
And on that moment, will you feel your father with you standing there?
I always feel him with me anyway.
Do you rule out the possibility of ever running for president of your country?
No, if you're a politician, you never rule out such a possibility.
Do you have aspirations in that regard?
I have aspirations in doing as much as I possibly can for my country. And I do not know in which way I shall be able to do it. And whatever that way is, I would be prepared to walk it.
You're no longer the lady under house arrest who commanded the attention of the world. So some might ask, how do you remain a beacon as you have been?
I don't really know what being a beacon involves. I just carry on with the work I have to do. In fact, of course, I need hardly explain that I'm a lot busier now than I used to be when I was under house arrest, and even busier since I entered the legislature last July, because the fact that I've become a member of the legislature does not mean that I have been able to put aside any of the other work that I had been doing previously with my party and with the people. So I suppose it's hard work that makes me what I am.
Do you fear that your country could backslide into a dictatorship?
I won't say I fear it. I won't use the word fear, but of course I'm aware of the possibility. You cannot say that it's impossible, but I won't call it a fear. I have said very often that we cannot say the process is irreversible. Theoretically speaking, no process is irreversible. I have to remind people that when Burma fell under a military regime in 1962, we were a democracy. We had a democratic government. So situations are reversible. What we have to hope is, well, not hope. I think hope is not enough. I always say that hope is not enough unless you work for it. So what we have to work towards is a situation where everybody will have more to lose by reversing the process than by going ahead with it.
Thank you.